This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Special episode of The Baseline, trade deadline discussions. The clock has now finally struck, and all teams need to stop what you're doing, put a pause button, so we can start talking about some of the movements that have already happened throughout the course of this day and really over the course of the last week or so with the trades that have taken place. And what better way for me to be able to have this great conversation? My man Warren Shaw, and one of our longtime peoples, man. He's been doing it for so long. He's been covering sports. He's been covering music, culture, entertainment. You can catch him on YouTube. Has one of the most vibrant channels that's going on right now. Our man Scoop B, Brandon Robinson, joining us, man. Scoop, long time no see, my brother. You're looking well.
Thank you, brother. It's good to talk to you.
Awesome. Shaw, how are we looking, man? What were your feeling, your thoughts about the movements that have taken place? Like, if you could think of one word that could really kind of signify how the NBA trade deadline came out in your eyes, what would it be?
I don't know if I can be as succinct as to say one word, but I do think it's, I'll try and say that open. And by that, I mean is that the landscape of the league is open and a lot of teams feel like they have an opportunity and a chance. So a lot of deals were done even previous to the deadline deal. Obviously, James Harden, much earlier in the season, and then Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, et cetera, et cetera. But to me, that signifies that nobody's looking at another roster and feels like, oh, I'm scared of them. Everybody feels like they have a chance in this situation. So the moves that we saw today, even some of the things on the proverbial edges that gives you maybe a solid third or fourth starter, that signifies to me that, hey, everybody feels like they have a chance at this season. So the Nuggets being the defending champions doesn't scare anybody. The Celtics being number one in the East doesn't scare anybody. So that's exciting thing for NBA fans specifically, as a lot of moves were made today on trade deadline day.
How about you, Scoop?
Yeah, I would echo what he said, but I also think some of the things that benefited teams that were talked about in contender conversation. I think the addition of Patrick Beverley on of the Milwaukee Bucks benefits them defensively exponentially, particularly on the weak side, because Damian Lillard, as much as we know him as a prolific scorer, playmaker alongside Giannis, I think defensively, I think Pat Bev is going to push him in practice, and two, I think Philadelphia got better adding an offensive piece. There's a logjam at the 2 and 3 position in Indiana, and Buddy Hield was the odd man out in that instance. And with Embiid out for at least a month, you can't solely depend on Tyrese Maxey on a night-in, night-out basis to get you scoring. You need some help. And if Kyle Lowry reaches a buyout with the Charlotte Hornets, I think that actually helps Maxey get additional rest come the second half of the season. And then you wait for Embiid to come back. As far as the New York Knicks, I think they added pieces to their already deep or at least their talented roster. I won't say deep. I think that the move made them deeper. And I also think that when you look at the Phoenix Suns, who many expected to make a run in the second half of the season, adding Royce O'Neale, a small piece to some, a giant come playoff time defensively is going to help the Phoenix Suns quite a bit. He's very familiar with the NBA's Western Conference, having played for the Utah Jazz. Those are some of the tidbits that I picked up on.
Yeah, I think depth is the word that comes to mind, for myself. And the teams that you listed off, Scoop, are teams that clearly recognize that for them to endure and for them to make the significant run, their roster has to be full. I know it's real easy that you can basically run with maybe 6-7 deep come playoff time. But I do think that this run for the championship is going to require at least 9 deep for most contending rosters. And it's interesting that the Bucks did make that play to bring a guy like Patrick Beverley in. You probably think that they would double down more on probably trying to score the basketball, but clearly even with the addition of Doc Rivers, even with the addition of and they moved whatchamacallit, Robin Lopez, right? Like, to me, I feel like they need to be quicker, they need to be more athletic, but they also need to be more disciplined for them to get back to where they believe that they needed to be. Did it surprise you that the Knicks really moved like a lot of bodies in order to get Burke and Bogdanovic? And do you think that makes them significantly better? Because I think one of the good things that people felt like with the Knicks is that they had a really deep roster to sustain the injuries that they've endured. Now we're finding out that OG Anunoby is going to be gone for another 3, possibly 4 weeks in order to get himself back on the mend.
Well, I think that they already had an impressive roster, and I think even in Julius Randle's absence, Dante DiVincenzo held up more than his end of the bargain. And in addition to that, you bring in an Alec Burke that already had a familiarity playing for the Knicks. I think, to me, this signals one. The thing that they want to add more of is premium three-point shooting. You have that with Josh Hart, who also not only gets you premium three-point shooting, but for a swingman at his size, gets you solid rebounding, but you get someone who's a solid shooter. So when Julius Randle does come back, he's a proficient passer, can kick out in the double team and pass the ball pretty well to an open bogey. But in addition to that, the same goes for Jalen Brunson, who has another hand to feed in the secondary when you want to play Brunson along the secondary, or if you decide in certain games you want to start Bogey. I think the Knicks were in a good position. And, the fact that they were able to rest Mitchell Robinson and go on such a run, and doing so, when he comes back, he's fresh and he's able to spell folks in minutes. I think that the Knicks definitely, this is the year to really execute on trying to win a championship. But I'll add this. I think another sneaky move that benefited a team in the NBA's Eastern Conference was the move that the Boston Celtics made to get Xavier Tillman. Definitely someone who is rough and tough, rabid Wolverine and X-Men, if you will, something that they missed with, parting ways with Marcus Smart. And I think that the East has gotten more competitive, and some of the guys that they brought in on the Knicks side, as well as the Celtics side, as well as the Bucks and the Philadelphia 76ers.
Interesting. I was going to say, Shaw, I wanted you to weigh in on that because we talked about that. Me personally really like the move of the Celtics getting, Xavier Tillman. I think he brings a little bit of that element that the Celtics first got when they had gotten Daniel Tice. But I feel like he's a more foundational kind of guy, can really learn off of Al Horford and those guys and really help them shore up a little bit of what we'd seen, which was slippage from the front court position, being able to compete, get physical, with those bigger teams, especially when Joel Embiid and when Randall come back fully strong and healthy for that final stretch run.
Yeah, a lot of it here is also with Boston. They need guys to eat up some minutes. Like we talk about this all the time, like from the baseball side, you need those innings eaters, if you will. So Boston has been relying so heavily on their starting lineup, that front six. And now you get another guy who can actually play and not hurt you when he's out there. I think defensively, Keita was, he's obviously a big body for them as well, but he's inexperienced. So I think Tillman has a little bit more just kind of, experience in the NBA, a little bit more just understanding and basketball IQ by virtue of that experience, and allows Joe Mazzulla, again, another body to play out there that can spell Al, that can spell Kristaps as well too in the front court. And again, a guy who's switchable and can technically go into that lineup and shoot threes in the way that Boston wants to continue to do, especially from the corner side of it too. So Boston definitely, made a smart move. They didn't have a lot of money to make a larger move anyway. So they find another partner again in Memphis for the second time within the last year to get a deal done. What Scoop was talking about, though, is really interesting to me and kind of want to take it next, especially when it comes to the Eastern Conference, right? Philadelphia. So I'm singing their praises in the beginning because I was listening. The Buddy Hield deal made a lot of sense to me. They get Buddy Hield. He doesn't compete with what Tyrese Maxey does. In fact, he's a compliment to Maxey and Embiid in a lot of ways. Guy who can shoot the three, at a high proficiency, and doesn't really have a whole lot of usage, right? He's more of a kind of a standstill shooter. But then they go and make moves and trade guys to their proverbial rivals, a la Pat Bev to Milwaukee, and then even a smaller move, Jaden Springer to the aforementioned Boston Celtics. Now that seems to symbolize that they think they're going to get Kyle Lowry in the buyout market, so to speak. But what were your thoughts on the overall movement from the Philadelphia 76ers with Embiid out here now, Scoop B, the Buddy Hield situation, but then trading players to clearly conference rivals, within the same year for competing for an NBA title?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. You did give it to a conference rival. Luckily for them, they didn't give it to a division rival. But I think when you look at the fact that they brought in Campaign as well, I think he's someone that does have a level of playoff experience to add to that team. But I think the Buddy Hield move was essential for them because that offense is built around Joel Embiid. And while he's out, you have to add additional offensive scoring. And so to me, the Pat Bev move was surprising, but the Buddy Hield move was someone that they had coveted for some time. Someone that they had coveted, I'm told, as far back as when he was in Sacramento. And, to me, they got who they wanted under different circumstances, of course, and beat out for at least a month or more. Again, you look at Tyrese Maxey, he's going to need some help scoring the basketball in a world where, you also have Mo Bamba and you have there's one other guy. It's been a long day at their disposal.
Tobias Harris.
Well, Tobias Harris is there, but I was talking about the other long guy, 3-and-D guy. But long story short, to me, yes, you look at the buyout market with Kyle Lowry. I was actually disappointed that Morris was let go. I thought that him staying there would have been beneficial for the long run, at least from positions 4 to 5, while you're waiting for Embiid to come back. That wasn't in the cards. But to me, the fact that basketball right now is such a high-scoring game, you got guys scoring 125 to 145 a night sometimes, adding a Buddy Hield, who you mentioned could spot up shoot. I think it was also beneficial because the Pacers were so logjam at that swingman position themselves, having brought in Pascal Siakam and also more and more having faith in Benedict Mathurin, who, now he gets more minutes to me in the Pacers offense. Rick Carlisle shared with me that, he likes the approach that Benedict Mathurin has, and he feels like an older vet on that team. And when you have the assurance or the confidence from a head coach and you as just a rookie, they make a move like that for Buddy Hield. It kind of makes sense in the end. So Philadelphia lucks out by them having so many guys at that position. And I think that that's going to help Philly even in the playoffs, because once Joel Embiid does come back and you add Buddy Hield into the mix and potentially bringing in Kyle Lowry as a backup, and you have Tobias Harris, who's been in every trade rumor imaginable, and you add the thing that Philly was missing was firepower. Tobias Harris can't be the only swingman. You need to add another guy at that 2-3 position that can work wonders in that system. And one thing, in that Philly system now with the head coach, they're going to do a lot of running. Buddy's going to fit in very well in that system.
Scoop B joining us here on the baseline, Callie Warren Shaw. I got a quick question to ask you then, Scoop.
What up?
So you think they're all in with this trifecta of Tobias Harris, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey? Now, I know Buddy Hield is an X factor, so to speak, but I guess just out of what I had interpreted and thought, that I guess if the sample size presented itself well and the stock was high, and you could probably maybe move some pieces, change the dynamic with someone as versatile a coach as Nick Nurse, I wouldn't have been surprised if maybe Tobias Harris got moved for the right price or whatever. But do you buy into the idea that this can work? That three-headed monster in Philly can work? My
opinion is that it could work, but it also, looking in the offseason, I feel like a lot of these moves that were made at the trade deadline were chess pieces that will further develop in the offseason. So when I look at this move with bringing in Buddy Hield, in my mind, while I'd like to see it be successful, I still think that Tobias Harris is going to give you valued stats on a stat sheet. But if Hield turns out to be what they needed, it could make Tobias expendable in the offseason, and you could look elsewhere. But In the meantime, you're going to go while the going gets hot. Tobias has been all reliable for them for the last couple of years.
Well, one of the things I think with Philly, and to kind of close the book on them, is like the Hield situation gives them flexibility because he is on an expiring. So they will have cap space next year. If they want to retain him, they can, or they move him and move Harris out if this would be. I think it really is found money with the development of Tyrese Maxey and just how good he has been. But now, I've seen a lot of people kind of talking stuff on social media more recently, like, we'll see if Tyrese is really like that with Joel Embiid being out right now. And listen, hey, it's not meant for him to be the guy on that team, but he will get some more licks in here now and then understand what it means for defenses to focus in on him, for the rest of the season, or for the time that Joel is out. Let's transition really quickly over to the Western Conference, and you mentioned, what the Mavericks have done. Well, you talked a little bit more about what the Suns have done, but let's talk about what the Mavericks have done as well too. Another team that I think improved their overall positioning here with Luka and Kyrie. Obviously, getting Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington from Charlotte. Your thoughts on the Mavs now, where they stand in the Western Conference as they try to build out of their. I think they're currently 7th. What is the ceiling for the Mavericks in your opinion, Scoop?
I think the Mavs, particularly because now they have minus Luka wearing a face mask, a healthy 1-2 punch with Kai and Luka, but they were missing that third piece. Some thought that Grant Williams would be that, but Grant gets to go back home to Charlotte, as does Seth Curry. But in the grand scheme of things, I think PJ Washington is a scoring guy that would benefit that team a lot. There's been times he's gone off in Charlotte, and it's good to see meaningful basketball or meaningful minutes now being played for PJ Washington instead of meaningless minutes in Charlotte. I think adding him to that pot was something that Dallas was looking to do in the offseason when they were looking for a third option alongside those two guys. I do know that Draymond Green was at one point on their wish list. I know that at some point, Kyle Kuzma was somebody that they had coveted really since September. A very close Mavs source shared with me that, they think that he's probably underrated, very much so defensively. But I also know Sacramento was another team that was in on Kuzma. Ultimately, Kuzma stayed in Washington. But I think that the Daniel Gafford part is really the part that is going to help them a lot. A guy that came in from Chicago, playing alongside Levine, and then found his way to Chicago to Washington. In a lot of respects, was a throw-in in a move to Washington. And the landlord, I've watched him firsthand in Washington, loved it in our nation's capital. But I think that style of play that he exhibits, running, playing defense, I think he is Jerome Junkyard Dog Williams with a better jump shot.
Nice. Hey, Scoop, the Thunder get Gordon Hayward.
I love that move, by the way.
And I've been, I'm glad you're going to speak to this because I'm trying to wrap my mind around and said, will this make them, a better roster? Obviously, availability is the key, but he's shown that he's been relatively healthy and he's been contributing for the Charlotte Hornets. So he's another person that you were just alluding to a moment ago, where meaningless minutes, in Charlotte now can mean significant and meaningful minutes, playing playing with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So what was your take, and how do you see, Daigneault utilizing Hayward? Do you think he's going to be like an X factor guy, like their main six?
Gordon Hayward to me is everything Eric Piatkowski was supposed to be on a more polished, disciplined Clippers team back in the early 2000s. And it's not just because he's white. It's because you have a team like Shai Gilgeous or a leader in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, players like Lou Dort and others, particularly Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who draws the double team, triple team on a night-in, night-out basis. And now he can kick it out to an open guy, but Hayward can drive to the basket himself. He's not just a spot-up shooter. I spent some time with the Thunder last season in Oklahoma, and the one thing that they've been developing and really have been focusing on every year is developing a system where guys actually want to be there, guys are having fun, and guys are winning. And the one thing that I really noticed or knew going into this offseason was how excited Lou Dort from Montreal was to play with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from Toronto in the Olympics. I know oftentimes we talk about two-team USA basketball and how guys connected and how their swag developed. But if you look at that Canadian team, those guys really connected in the offseason. And Lou Dort and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had that chemistry, and it carried over into training camp, and it carried over into the regular season. And they've been one of the hottest teams that are not always being talked about because they're not a New York or a Los Angeles or more. You even see that in the NBA's Eastern Conference where the Cleveland Cavaliers are on a 7-game winning streak, and they're doing their thing in the Eastern Conference. So when you look at the Oklahoma City Thunder, adding Gordon Hayward, you're forcing the critics as well as the supporters to talk about them if you win. Minnesota had that same problem, and off and on throughout the course of this season, you see Minnesota and Oklahoma battle for the first and second seed. Now you see the Clippers kind of catching up and doing their thing. But I like to see the level of competition that is in that Western Conference, and Oklahoma definitely added to that by bringing in Gordon Hayward, a guy who has been in the deep run in the playoffs and, now can kind of add to the pot alongside Chet Holmgren, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and more. They're like a young, old team. You have the right amount of young people and the right amount of seasoned people. That's like a recipe for success, if you ask me.
Yeah, with them trading out as many guys as they did for Gordon, so assuming Gordon does come back and is healthy, the overwhelming notion for the Thunder going into this was like, hey, they needed to get a big. So Gordon doesn't address that need per se, but obviously we'll talk a little bit about buyout candidates at the end of the season or at the end of the show, if you will. But to me, that's something where getting Gordon in here, as you alluded to, from the veteran side, a guy who does a little bit of everything, can help with the playmaking. I think it's a great move for the Oklahoma City Thunder. As you touched on the Timberwolves too, though, what did you think about their move in getting Monty Morris, to back up an aging and often injured Mike Conley? But that team does look lost sometimes where they don't have great point guard play. I thought it was a solid move. Your thoughts on the Monty Morris deal from a couple days ago?
Yeah, I think the Monty Morris move was pretty good, particularly because he was playing meaningless minutes. He had just gotten back into the rotation in right. Detroit. And it seemed like everybody was bouncing everybody off of Detroit. Detroit was like the middle point for everybody. It was like it reminded me of how last decade everybody came through Orlando before they ended up winning a championship or being on a bigger contender. You think of like Trevor Ariza leaving Orlando, going to the Knicks, going to the Lakers. Detroit was that point too. But I digress. When I look at Monty Morris's move there, he's a guy that's looking for a fit. I spent a lot of time around him last season when he was in Washington, and he spoke reverently about his time in Denver, but it just seemed like in Washington last season, he just never found a groove. Washington brought him in to play alongside his childhood friend Kyle Kuzma. I talked to Monty tonight. Monty's excited to get started in Minnesota. They're a franchise that embraces their players. They build around their players, and he's in a situation where he can play alongside an Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and a Rudy Gobert. He does well. Naz Reid has been such a institution as a role player for the Minnesota Timberwolves this season. I think that the sky's the limit for him. And, he shared with me about a month ago that the difference between last season and this season has been how much on one accord Rudy and Karl has been, and how they've been able to find the right spacing to make things happen. And Anthony Edwards, of course, is the key that starts the engine. I asked him if he had to compare Anthony Edwards to a car, which would he be? He said, a Lambo, no question. Now you got a Lambo and you got a driver in Monty Morris who can steer the ship, and Anthony Edwards could just sit in the back and be driven around and make big plays when he needs to. It's a recipe for success. But they definitely have veteran leadership as well with Mike Conley Jr. And I think that they just are trying to gear up for the playoffs to compete with the Oklahomas, the Clippers, and the Denver Nuggets of the world. So I like the move for Monty Morris. I think he's an added piece that's going to benefit that team.
Scoop B joining us here on the Baseline, Callie Warren Shaw. Be sure to check out his YouTube channel. I do believe that you dropped an exclusive interview with Mr. Michael Buffer, I believe.
I did yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I'm just saying, Scoop B's now should put legendary to the left of that, whenever you're getting A-listing legendary individuals like Michael Buffer. I was actually gonna take the opportunity to really check that out, man, because he's one of my favorite, not just ring announcers, but just individuals and personalities and stuff like that. So congratulations on being able to have that sit down conversation, for on your YouTube channel, man.
Thank you. And maybe there will be 2 more that drop tomorrow. I'll share with you Jamal Wilkes, as well as DJ Envy. Those will both drop tomorrow on my YouTube channel. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Scoopy TV, as well as the Scoopy Radio podcast on all streaming platforms.
Absolutely. All right, Scoop. So, look, man, let's talk about who didn't. I know we're talking about the dids, but I'm really curious from your perspective, and we can stay on the Western Conference and then maybe pivot to the East if you believe that there's any teams who you thought should have made some kind of move to be made. So I'm just curious from your perspective, who would you have expected, for us to be talking about on today's trade deadline?
I knew that the Pelicans and the Hawks were having some level of conversation concerning adding a center or a center or power forward, a center that can shoot, or a rim protector. I know that the Pelicans had their eyes on Onyeka Okongwu of the Hawks, but the talks never really materialized. I know that the Pelicans' focus was on a backup point guard, as well as a rim protector. And I'm told that, they are looking to add a 14th man to the roster. And that's where the buyout market comes together. I'll be honest with you, the 3 names across the league that I think, number one, rim protector, I think Robin Lopez would fit like a glove in that system with the Pelicans. But I'll add that I also feel like Robin Lopez would fit like a glove in Philadelphia while Joel Embiid is out. And now that you've added scoring power to their system with Hield, that would benefit them. But I think in the system that the Pelicans run, quite naturally, Robin Lopez would fit. I think that was the surprise that they didn't execute on the move. I know Wendell Carter Jr. was another guy that was of interest to that team. As far as I think people were surprised that the Lakers didn't make a move. I was not, because trading D'Angelo Russell never made sense to me, particularly because if DeJounte Murray was your target, he didn't have any reps with those guys going into training camp. And I'm big on, if you're going to make a move like that and you think you're making a run for a championship, those guys have to be on one accord. I feel like the Lakers' problem has been the fact that the guys that they signed and or re-signed or signed, they basically have been hurt. So Taurean Prince has been in and out. You look at LeBron and Anthony Davis have been in and out, but ultimately, at one point people were calling for Darvin Ham's job. I really think that the Lakers, as much as we talk about the Nuggets and the Clippers and the Suns, I think once healthy, they can compete. I'm not willing to call them a championship team just yet because they've been teeter-tottering, but I never thought that making a move for DeJounte Murray in the middle of the season made sense.
Scoop, let's stay out west, and then obviously we'll swing over to the east. So, just again, for due diligence, we got to touch, I guess, on the Warriors. So similarly, I think the Dubs feel like, listen, they just need some guys to play better. And maybe that's fool's gold, but I think that's their thinking going into this, and that they're not usually a team that makes a whole lot of deals in the middle of the season anyway. So from your standpoint, did the Warriors standing pat not necessarily surprise you, but do you just feel like that was the right move for them, given what they've accomplished and how they're trying to manage that team? Because I think one other thing too is, I know a lot of larger media outlets are talking about moving Klay Thompson, but somebody said today, I think it might have been watching ESPN, the gravity that would take away from that locker room. I don't even know if just bringing in somebody else, I don't know if it brings the energy and the oomph that they might have been looking for, because Klay's such a centerpiece of what they've done for so long. So that to me seems is more better absorbed over the course of a summer than the middle of a season if they're going to try to make a move like that. Your thoughts?
That's an all-season conversation. And I'll add that as much as you said he's the gravity of that team, being around them, and Draymond being the heart and soul of that team. Again, he's when you're a shooter, you have to have a short memory. And when you're in a slump, you're in a slump. But when you hot, you hot. I think that the Warriors, to me, are like the new age Spurs. Like, they're at some point they sneak up on you, and you're like, how did they get here? So I think they're a rhythmic shot, a run away. You look at the last 2 seasons, like not last season, but the season before, they made it to the finals. And after guys sat out for a long period of time, like, they are the half-court YMCA team. I'm not saying they're going to the finals, but what I'm saying is you don't mess up chemistry like that during the middle of the season, especially someone who's been a cornerstone of that franchise. That's a dialogue you have in the offseason. I never really bought into the fact that Clay was getting moved. But I think there are some teams across the league that he would fit well. And that's a conversation that if he leaves, you revisit in the offseason. So, yeah, the Lakers and the Warriors are just those teams that, they have veterans that really kick it into a high gear the second half of the season. And I think Denver is becoming that. They just look old. But even though they're a little young, or they're guys that were on other teams, Phoenix is in a similar space. So you're going to see guys really kicking into the next gear in the second half of the season, and maybe add a piece or two. And that's what I look at with the Warriors specifically.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the Lakers and the Warriors are, they're buyout buddies. They like to, to shop, and get the groceries at bargain rates. And there's nothing wrong with that, because some of the players that they do put on their roster are serviceable, whether it's for short-term or a long-term need, So with that being said, I'm just curious, what happened to the Sacramento Kings? A year ago, this team came out like lightning in a bottle, right? Like, they just are like to me, like the next level Warriors, right? We dubbed them as the next Warriors 2.0 or whatever. And you would have thought that, given what the roster is, and this team has struggled, they don't look nearly as crisp as they did last year. You would still think that they would have to tweak that team if there's an expectation, one, to reposition themselves back to where they are, and then two, to not fall off from what they, built up, if the perception is that they're not going to be, looked as overachievers. So what is your take about the fact that the Kings really didn't make any is it more that they're really confident and they just figure this thing out, or should there be a reason to be concerned?
I get the sense that Kuzma, who was on their dartboard, couldn't come at the right price, one. Two, injuries to Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox and others have kind of been like that, just the level of inconsistency, or people not like, I never bought into the Warriors the next coming. I actually I've always over the last year have said this. I look at the Sacramento Kings as Denver light more than I did a second coming of the Warriors. And I think I look at them similarly to how I looked at the Knicks when they made the playoffs for the first time in the last, like when they played against the Hawks in the playoffs, and the Hawks and the Knicks had the same exact record, and they excited a lot of people. And then I feel like the last couple of years they teeter-tottered, and then along came OG Anunoby. Like, it's going to take a level of a name to come in, a defensive stopper to come in. Like, I think that's what happens. I kind of look at the Atlanta Hawks that way. Like, the Hawks were this close from going to the finals, and they were a young squad. And then it's DeJounte Murray coming in. And, like, I just remember that team going toe for toe with the Bucks, and they just didn't hold on until the end. I look at Sacramento the same way. I think they're a player away, like a third player away from being combative.
So let's swing it out to the Eastern Conference here a little bit now. And just from the aspect is, because I got to ask, have the Bulls just trapped themselves? Like, I think now, obviously, Levine got injured and they weren't able to move him. But Drummond had a lot of interest from what I've heard or read. And he's played well when given the opportunity minutes. They started double bigs more recently against the Minnesota Timberwolves the other night. Vucevic and Drummond started, and they both found a way to play well. Now, again, that's because Minnesota is a big team, so I don't know if Donovan will do that every single night, but what are the Bulls doing? Like, I love the season Kobe White has had. Love it. I think he's just been amazing this year. But they're a 10 seed, and I don't know that there's a whole lot of upward trajectory for them. Did they miss the boat by not making a move, or is your sense like, hey, they're just trying to compete with this roster and see where it goes?
I think the Bulls' biggest hurdle has been the fact that Lonzo Ball has been out, and he was such a significant part to this Bulls rebuild. And I think also, as you're asking me this question, it reminds me of the trade deadline a couple of years ago, where the Pelicans and the Bulls were having a conversation about Lonzo, and ultimately the Bulls waited until the offseason to bring in Lonzo, and they kept Kobe. Imagine if they didn't, their season would have been a lot worse. I swear they would have been like they would have had the 40th worst record in the NBA. And there's not even 40 teams. Like, I think when you look at the Bulls and I think the other issue is this. If you looked at the beginning of the season, there were many out there who believed that the Knicks and the Miami Heat would have been buyers at the trade deadline or at some point during the season for DeMar DeRozan. And what happened was Terry Rozier went to Miami and OG Anunoby went to the New York Knicks. And so the dialogue then shifted because the Bulls started to be a little bit more competitive. And then you looked at the Bulls and Zach LaVine and the Lakers was something we talked about, and then he got hurt again. And so now that conversation about the Lakers and the Bulls was kind of dead. The other thing is, I think that the Bulls waiting until the offseason makes more sense because, again, I go back to what I said about chessboards. That conversation about LaVine could be a revisit this offseason. I think that when you look at the talent that they have on the floor, their talent looks good, just not together and not on that team because they've been hurt. I think that the Bulls and the Washington Wizards are in very similar situations. They have certain guys that are names, but together on a team, they just are not good. But I think a la carte, they benefit other teams. I think LaVine and his health is a red flag for some teams because it seems like he's a name. He's been an all-star, but his level of staying healthy and consistency has been lacking. DeMar DeRozan, to me, I can build around him. Vooch, I can build around him. But I really think that for the Bulls, their biggest portion is the fact that Lonzo Ball, a quarterback, I know that's a word that's used negatively, but a quarterback type of point guard that you can use in their system would have done wonders for him, for that team had they stayed healthy, and that's just not been the case. I think they revisit something this offseason. What? I don't know.
Scoop B joining us here on the baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, our trade deadline discussion. So Scoop, you basically tell me this team didn't do nothing, was probably the best thing that happened for him, East or West. Who you tell him?
Ask me that question again.
Which team that didn't do anything, it was the best move made? The team that did not do anything, and it was good for them to not do something. You know, sometimes you got to feel like you got to get in the mix, and then whatever it is that you're doing really doesn't bode well for you, whether it be on or off the court.
Probably the Orlando Magic. We talked about every other hot button team. I think they're a young team to watch. And like I mentioned before, you have a rising star in Paolo Banchero. You got some other pieces around them. I think, the biggest thing that's been talked about with the Magic was Wendell Carter Jr. And I think defensively they'll at least be decent. I don't think they're going to the finals. I don't think they're going to the second round, but I think Orlando didn't really need to give Wendell to another team to make them better.
I like that call. I think a lot of Orlando Magic fans on our timelines were like, hey, do something. They wanted, backup point guards or whatever. And I think in essence, that brings us to be the next part of the conversation is the buyouts. Now, two things happened for me that I was like, just like that, like just peace. Killian Hayes just dropped by the Pistons. Just peace out. James Bouknight, peace out in Charlotte. And then, unfortunately, I think what didn't happen for PJ Tucker on the Clippers, he's pieced in. He hasn't found his way out just yet. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts on this potential buyout market and some of the guys that might be available for teams that didn't make a move as of yet?
I think Joe Harris will be the thought process of some. I know he has a relationship with both Kyrie and with LeBron. Is that someone that you bring in over there? He also has a relationship with Kevin Durant. I'm not sure I'm not sure how many guys they have on the active roster now, so don't quote me. But Yuta Watanabe was not a fit. He was moved. You thought that he'd get you some premium 3-point shooting. Maybe Phoenix would work. LA makes sense on that front. I think that's the biggest name that I saw for a team with championship aspirations. And Kyle Lowry, again, I see Philadelphia or Los Angeles chasing him, but a guy from North Philly, Cardinal Dockery's own, Villanova's own, Philadelphia makes the most sense to me for Kyle Lowry if he reaches a buyout with the Charlotte Hornets.
And what do you think is going to happen with Dennis Schroeder? Because I know we haven't made much of discussion, but if the Lakers are thinking about trying to do something, do you think that Schroeder stands pat, or do you think that he also could possibly be out buyout friendly and he would want to return back to La La Land?
Well, I definitely think the Nets are trying to build blocks like Tetris and stack a lot of chips as far as just their future goes and building around Mikal Bridges, Dennis Smith Jr., and others. There's a lot of guards on that Nets team. And I don't think while the Lakers would definitely be a team of interest, he wanted to resign with them and he ultimately went in another direction. I also look at other teams out there that are in need of a point guard, like a Pelicans team. I know that Dante Exum in Dallas is a de facto point guard, but I just think they got too many guards in Dallas, so Dallas may not be the best fit. But New Orleans would be a fit. To me, the Clippers would be a fit. Those are the two teams that stand out to me right now. Maybe Houston, but ultimately, Victor Oladipo I think was also bought out. I'm not sure what the market is for him. Indiana a return there would be great, but I don't know how the relationship was with Indy after he left. So, but as far as your question about Dennis Schroeder, either LA team would make sense to me if he decides to get some sort of buyout with the Brooklyn Nets.
Scoop, before we let you get out of here, just is there anything else that you can expect to see? Any other names? Again, I touched on PJ Tucker. Spencer Dinwiddie potentially rumored to the Lakers, I think, as we're going there. And people are still getting waived and dropped, as we're recording. So names are still flying off the board. But, is there anybody else that you'd like to see, maybe land somewhere else? You mentioned Marcus Morris as well, too. Any potential landing spots for some of those guys?
I can't think of any right now. It's been a long day. But if I have anything else,
that's what the NBA does to you, Scoop.
Yeah, to specifically tell you, thank you for having me on your show, though.
No, absolutely, man. Listen, it's been great, to be able to have you on board, man. Again, we totally applaud the efforts. You're out there, you're doing your thing, you're marrying the game, you know what I'm saying, with the culture, and it's awesome to see. And we want to continue to support that platform as well, too, man. So, by all means, man, let people know what you got going on. I know you mentioned that you have 2 new interviews coming down the pike again. So make sure you let our audiences know where to catch it and when they should expect for those to happen.
So most importantly, follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ScoopB. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at ScoopBTV. And subscribe to the Scoopy Radio podcast on all streaming platforms. And a couple interviews dropping tomorrow. DJ Envy, Jamal Wilkes. We dropped one with Michael Buffer earlier this week, a couple weeks ago. Prince Jackson, Michael Jackson's son. So a lot of, overlay and crossover into other things. But, keep it locked. Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, everything in between. Thank you, brothers, for having me once again.
Absolutely. Thanks for hopping on board with us, Brandon, man. Best of luck, brother.
Likewise. You too. Keep shining.
Right. Yes, indeed, Mr. Shaw. Look, man, a lot of movement. Not. You know what? Listen, not a lot of big names, but I think it's more so the teams that did make those moves, and I think it shored up a lot of what we've been talking about through the course of the first half, of of the season. That if these teams are really serious, that they truly believe there's an opportunity, a pathway to probably get into, the NBA finals, that they're going to need to utilize the trade deadline smartly, not overextend themselves. And I think we saw that with a lot of the teams that participated in making the kind of moves that they've made.
Yeah, I think what ended up happening is, like, again, no big names on trade deadline day. A lot of the work was done earlier in the year, as I said in the outset. But one thing I will say about the Knicks specifically, because I think a lot of them are saying that they are the winners of the day. In a lot of ways, they are, because they've still preserved cap flexibility. They still have all of their first round draft picks. They didn't move their first round draft pick in any of these deals, and they can still see how things go. So I'm excited for them. The Cavs standing pat, I thought, was an interesting situation, but they're just so hot right now. So, they feel like they needed to do anything significant. The Nuggets stand pat as well. They're defending champions. Yes, they don't have Bruce Brown anymore, but they feel like, hey, they'll be able to figure it out. Bruce Brown doesn't move from Toronto, so the Toronto keeps that chip and that opportunity to move him, maybe, right as we're getting into free agency, because they will have a team option on him. Just so a lot of like little machinations, but as you alluded to, this is a very, very wide open situation with, moves that we'll be interested to see. And with now the trade deadline past us and All-Star on the horizon, this is one of the reasons the NBA did it this way, because now you'll have all that rest, right? There'll be like roughly like 9 days without actual NBA games at some point. And so, yes, some guys will go on vacation and they'll be in the islands and so forth and so forth. But for coaches and players who stay, they'll be able to get some practice time. And for some of these new players, they'll be able to actually learn their teammates some as well. And I think that's a very, very huge thing. I think the worst thing for the Milwaukee Bucks is the All-Star break, because now Doc Rivers is supposed to coach it. So he doesn't get to take the weekend off, if you will, whatever. He's got to be doing that. And yes, there'll be a couple days afterwards. But to me, the All-Star break is a crucial point now coming after the trade deadline, because it allows teams and some players who did get moved or have new pieces, allows them to get acclimated a little bit in the throes of the season, as opposed where you wouldn't have that practice time before.
I will say, though, that to your point about Doc Rivers, I think this will actually help him. I think it will benefit him in some ways, because it keeps him around basketball. I think there's something to be said when you remove yourself, or you've been removed from that element as a coach, because you're doing a lot of media-like type things and not being invested in the coaching aspect of things. So I think he uses this opportunity to really observe. Listen, this is why Doc Rivers is always going to be regarded one of the great coaches, in NBA history, regardless of what people may say, regardless of, what his record is reflective of in the playoffs and things of that nature. He's a man that's prepared. He's shown, 58% winning percentage as an NBA coach. That, that's nothing to sniff at. And it's taking advantage of those opportunities that present themselves where most people consider it as downtime. That's probably prime time for Doc Rivers to prep and prepare and get these guys ready for the quick turnaround that's going to be necessary for this Bucks team to resupplant themselves again to be the team to beat in the Eastern Conference. So,
yeah, and I'm gonna, we'll close on a Bucks note, I guess, to some degree. I'm gonna speculate. I'm not source, you're not source, or whatever, but we take stock of what's going on in the league. If PJ Tucker ultimately gets a buyout from the Clippers, in this interesting situation, since they're soaring that he's not playing, but they're winning without him, I think a return to Milwaukee would be just what the doctor ordered. I think he would potentially go there. And I know everyone's going to say, oh, he'll go to the Lakers and, some of those, fancier teams. But to me, a return to Milwaukee makes a lot of sense. And yes, they have Jay Crowder still and like that too. But I think that's the spot he would be comfortable in going into. Or God forbid for Boston's fans, he goes back to Miami. I think it's going to be a retread. I don't think it'd be a brand new team that he hasn't played for before. He's going to go somewhere where he's comfortable.
All right. So PJ Tucker watch. That's what we'll be on. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I mean, listen, and the guy's a bulldog. You can't tell me you don't like Bulldogs when it's playoff time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, man. So a lot of fun stuff, man. A lot of fun stuff.
Bulldog and brothers like them Georgetown Hoyas.
See what you did there. See what you did.
Once again, man, we'd like to thank our man Scoop B, who was burning midnight oil and toughed it out to jump on board with us, man. Just really appreciate him taking the time to help us break down the trade deadline. And as always, my brother, appreciate you, you know what I'm saying, making it happen, you know what I'm saying, and again, for us, laying it down and discussing what needs to be discussed.
Yes, sir. We got to utilize our connections. And, Scoop B has been rocking with us for a little while too. So, glad to see that he's still doing his thing, in the ethos outside of even sports and entertainment, just, has it dialed in really and truly. And for us, we hope your fans, listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Baseline Trade Deadline Edition. What it wasn't an emergency podcast. We had it planned, but I think it was enough meat on the bone for us to have this conversation. So again, shout out to Scoop B, Brandon Robinson.
Absolutely. For the Baseline, Cal Lee Warrenshaw, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on board with us this week. We'll catch up with you next time.